The morning air on 442b tasted of copper and ozone, a warning that had learned to recognize after 18 months on this alien world. He crouched beside the crystalline formations that served as the nursery, watching three cubs no bigger than house cats play with fragments of luminescent rock. Their fur shimmered between silver and gold, and their large, intelligent eyes tracked his every movement with curiosity rather than fear. Had been assigned to this remote research outpost but that title felt meaningless now. They didn't see him as a scientist studying their species. To them, he was simply the strange, tall creature who brought them food and spoke to them in their own whistling language. The cubs had taken to following him around the camp, their parents too busy with the daily struggle of survival to worry about one harmless human. The sky above began to darken, though it was barely past what humans would call midday. Felt his stomach drop as he recognized the unnatural shift in atmospheric pressure. His handheld scanner erupted in warning beeps, detecting massive energy signatures approaching from the upper atmosphere. The adults immediately began their distress calls, a haunting melody that echoed across the rocky plains. "No, no, no," whispered, checking his communication device. The display showed nothing but static. The nearest human settlement was 300 kilometers away, far beyond the range of his emergency beacon. The orbiting research station had gone silent 2 days ago, and now he knew why. The Death Fleet had found them, had read the classified reports during his journey to 442b. They were an ancient warrior race that viewed all other intelligent species as either slaves or obstacles to be eliminated. They had been systematically wiping out colonies across this sector of the galaxy, leaving nothing but scorched worlds behind. Somehow, the peaceful had drawn their attention. The first spear of light pierced the atmosphere like a falling star, but knew it was no celestial phenomenon. The orbital bombardment lance struck the mountain range 50 kilometers away, turning solid rock into glass and plasma. The ground beneath his feet trembled, and the three cubs pressed against his legs, seeking comfort from the only creature that had ever shown them kindness. Looked down at their trusting faces and felt something fundamental shift inside him. These weren't just research subjects anymore. They were children who depended on him, and their parents were already moving to defend the rest of the colony. He could see the adult gathering at the edge of their settlement, their natural camouflage abilities flickering as stress overwhelmed their control. "Computer, run tactical analysis," said to his portable AI unit. "Analysis complete," the synthetic voice replied. "Bombardment pattern indicates systematic elimination of all life forms. Estimated time until direct strike on this location, 47 minutes. Closed his eyes and tried to think. His scientific training had prepared him for many scenarios, but becoming the last line of defense for an alien species wasn't one of them. He was just one human with basic survival equipment and a head full of data. What could he possibly do against a species that had conquered half the galaxy? The answer came to him as he watched the cubs huddle together, their parents' distress calls growing more desperate. He couldn't save the entire species, but he could save these three. More importantly, he could buy time for the adults to escape with the rest of the young ones. Activated his emergency protocols and began stripping his equipment down to essentials. His atmospheric suit had basic shielding capabilities, and his geological scanner could be modified into a crude energy weapon if he bypassed the safety protocols. It wouldn't be much against technology, but it might be enough to make them take notice. "Listen to me," he said to the cubs in their own language, his pronunciation rough but understandable. "Your parents need to take the others to the deep caves. I'm going to stay here and make the Sky Hunters think this place is dangerous." The smallest cub, barely old enough to walk properly, pressed its tiny paws against his hand. In the gesture language, it was asking him not to leave them alone. Felt his throat tighten as he realized what he was really choosing to do. "I won't leave you," he promised, gathering all three cubs against his chest. "But we need to be very brave now." Another spear of light split the sky, closer this time. The energy discharge lit up the horizon like a second sun, and could smell the acrid scent of vaporized stone carried on the wind. His scanner indicated massive ships moving into low orbit, their weapons charging for the final bombardment that would sterilize this entire region. Looked around the research camp one last time, memorizing the crystalline formations and the strange, beautiful landscape that had become his home. He thought about his family back on Earth, about the career he would never finish, about all the scientific discoveries that would remain unmade. Then he looked down at the three small lives pressed against him, trusting him completely, and knew he had made the right choice. "Computer, begin recording personal log," he said quietly. Recording commenced. "This is Doctor attached to Research Station 7. If anyone finds this recording, know that they are a peaceful, intelligent species worthy of protection. They have families, they have art, they have hopes for their children just like we do. Whatever happens next, remember that they deserved better than extinction." The ground shook again as another bombardment lance found its target. Could see the adult retreating toward the cave systems in the distance, carrying their young ones to safety. Soon, it would just be him and the three cubs he had sworn to protect, facing down the most feared military force in the galaxy. Began modifying his equipment with steady hands, his scientific mind calculating angles and energy outputs even as his heart raced with fear. He had 43 minutes to become something he had never been before, a warrior standing between innocence and annihilation. The cubs seemed to sense his determination. They stopped trembling and began to emit a soft, harmonious humming that he had learned was their way of showing trust and affection. In that moment, understood that some things transcended species, transcended the vast distances between stars. Love, loyalty, and the willingness to sacrifice for those who couldn't protect themselves, these were not uniquely human traits. But perhaps the stubborn refusal to give up in the face of impossible odds was something that made humans special in this vast, often cruel universe. Checked his improvised weapons one last time and prepared to find out exactly what one determined human could accomplish when everything he cared about was on the line. The spears of death continued to shriek from above, but they would have to go through him first. Watched the massive descend through the smoke-filled atmosphere like metallic angels of death. His modified scanner showed their heat signatures blazing hot against the darkened sky, and he could hear the low of their gravitational drives growing louder with each passing second. The orbital bombardment had stopped, which meant the enemy wanted to inspect their handiwork personally. The three cubs pressed closer to him as they hid behind an outcropping of the crystalline formations that dotted the landscape. Had chosen this position carefully. It gave him a clear view of the landing zone while providing cover from aerial observation. His improvised weapon array was spread out around him. The modified geological scanner that could now fire concentrated particle beams, explosive charges made from his emergency rations chemical heat packs, and a jury-rigged force field generator cobbled together from his atmospheric suit's shielding systems. "Stay very quiet," whispered to the cubs in their own language. "The Sky Hunters are coming to make sure everything is dead. We need to convince them they were wrong." The largest cub, who had appointed himself leader of the small group, flickered his fur in a pattern that had learned meant understanding and agreement. Despite their youth, cubs were remarkably intelligent. They grasped the gravity of the situation even if they couldn't fully comprehend the technology arrayed against them. The first touched down 300 meters away, its landing thrusters scorching the already damaged ground. Counted 24 more ships following in formation, disgorging troops that looked like a nightmarish fusion of insect and machine. They stood nearly 3 meters tall, their exoskeletons gleaming with built-in armor plating and weapon systems. Had studied their physiology in classified military briefings. They were perfectly evolved killing machines, with redundant organs, natural armor, and reflexes that put human soldiers to shame. But they had one weakness that intended to exploit: their arrogance. The commander, distinguished by additional armor plating and ceremonial scarring across his carapace, gestured to his troops with movements that reminded of a praying mantis studying its prey. Through his scanner's audio pickup, could hear fragments of their guttural language as they organized into search patterns. "Bioscans show minimal life remaining," the commander's voice carried clearly across the devastated landscape. "Standard elimination protocol. Burn anything that moves, catalog useful genetic material, prepare the world for processing." Felt cold fury wash over him as he realized these creatures viewed thee as nothing more than raw material to be harvested. He thought of the adult who had fled to the caves with their surviving young ones, and he prayed they had gotten far enough away to avoid the search parties. The first group of soldiers began moving in his direction, their sensors sweeping methodically across the terrain. Waited until they were 50 meters away, close enough for his improvised weapons to have maximum effect, then triggered his first surprise. The explosive charges he had planted around the perimeter detonated in a carefully timed sequence, sending fountains of rock and crystal shrapnel into the air. They immediately dropped into defensive positions, their weapons tracking for threats, but had positioned the charges to create the illusion of a much larger defending force. Unknown hostile forces detected, the commander's voice crackled over their communications. Pattern suggests organized resistance, increased security protocols. Smiled grimly as he activated his modified scanner and sent a concentrated particle beam lancing toward the nearest soldier. The improvised weapon lacked the power to penetrate their armor, but it created exactly the kind of energy signature that would register on their sensors as a military-grade weapon. The effect was immediate and satisfying. The entire force went into high alert, assuming they were facing a hidden garrison rather than one desperate scientist with improvised equipment. Used their momentary confusion to trigger his second wave of deceptions. Holographic projections created by reflecting his scanner's display beam off the natural crystal formations around him. Suddenly, they found themselves seemingly surrounded by ghostly figures darting between the rocks, each one appearing to carry advanced weaponry. The projections lasted only seconds before dispersing, but it was enough to convince the enemy commander that he was facing a sophisticated ambush. This world was supposed to be, the commander snarled to his subordinates. Where did these defenders come from, and what kind of weapons are they using? Allowed himself a moment of satisfaction as he watched the most feared military force in the galaxy hesitate in the face of smoke, mirrors, and one human's determination. But he knew his deception wouldn't hold for long. Already, they were adapting their tactics, using more advanced sensors to try to pierce through his illusions. The smallest cub tugged its sleeve and pointed toward the crystal formations behind them. Through the translucent structures, could see more landing on the far side of the settlement. They were surrounding the area, preparing to close the trap on whatever they thought was hiding here. Realized he had maybe 10 minutes before their sensors would reveal the truth about his one-man resistance. But 10 minutes might be enough to accomplish his real goal, not defeating which was impossible, but making them believe this world held secrets worth investigating rather than simply destroying. He activated his portable AI unit and began uploading false data into the local communication networks that they would inevitably access. The fabricated files suggested the presence of advanced defensive technologies, hidden military installations, and experimental weapons that required immediate study by scientists rather than battlefield commanders. Computer, embed those files in the geological survey data and make it look like we were trying to hide something big, whispered. Understood, creating artificial data corruption patterns to suggest concealed military research, the AI replied. As the false intelligence propagated through the local networks, prepared for the final phase of his desperate plan. He gathered the 3 cubs close to him and activated the force field generator he had improvised from his atmospheric suit. It would only provide protection for a few minutes against weapons, but it might be enough. Listen carefully, he told the cubs. In a moment, I'm going to make a lot of noise and light. The sky hunters will come looking for us, but they won't hurt us if they think we know something important. When they find us, stay very still and let me do all the talking. The largest cub looked up with those impossibly large, intelligent eyes and made a soft sound that he recognized as an expression of trust. In that moment, felt the full weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. These 3 small lives depended entirely on his ability to convince a species of genocidal conquerors that mercy served their interests better than destruction. Took a deep breath, activated every piece of equipment he had remaining, and prepared to surrender himself to the enemy in the most spectacular way possible. If he was going to become a prisoner of war, he was going to make sure the thought they had captured someone incredibly valuable. The particle beam from his modified scanner carved a brilliant line across the darkened sky, as announced his presence to the most dangerous predators in the galaxy. The warriors surrounded its position within minutes, their weapons trained on the makeshift force field that flickered and sparked around him and the 3 cubs. Stood slowly, his hands raised in what he hoped would be recognized as a universal gesture of surrender, while keeping himself positioned between the aliens and the young. The commander approached with the fluid grace of a natural predator, his compound eyes reflecting the dying light of failing force field generator. Up close, could see the intricate scarification patterns that decorated this carapace, each mark representing a world conquered, a species eliminated, a victory in their endless campaign of galactic domination. "You are human," the commander stated in surprisingly clear Standard Galactic. "Your kind was not recorded as present on this world. Explain your presence and the nature of your defensive systems." Had prepared for this moment during those agonizing minutes of waiting. His entire plan depended on selling the greatest lie of his life to a species that had perfected the art of extracting truth through pain. He thought of the cubs pressed against his legs, their trust absolute, and found the strength to project confidence he didn't feel. "I am Doctor, lead researcher for the Terran Military Science Division's Xenobiology Weapons Program," said, letting authority color his voice. "This world was selected as a testing ground for new biological warfare agents. The indigenous population provided ideal test subjects for our experiments." The commander's head tilted slightly, a gesture recognized from his studies as indicating heightened interest among leadership. Several subordinates moved closer, their sensors scanning and the cubs with increased intensity. "You claim these primitive creatures were weapons test subjects?" the commander asked. "Our orbital scans detected no significant military installations." Forced himself to smile coldly, adopting the expression he had seen on the faces of military officers who viewed other species as expendable resources. It made him sick to portray humanity in such a light, but the lives of 3 innocent cubs, and potentially the entire species, depended on his performance. "Of course you didn't detect them," replied. "The installations are entirely biological. We've been breeding enhanced as living weapons platforms, using their natural camouflage abilities to create perfect infiltrators. What you see as primitive creatures are actually the first generation of our most ambitious project." He gestured toward the cubs, who looked up at the towering with more curiosity than fear. Their natural innocence actually supported its fabricated story. If they were truly weapons, they would have been designed to appear harmless. The commander issued rapid commands in the language and felt his stomach drop as he realized he might have overplayed his hand. But instead of ordering his execution, the commander seemed to be calling for additional personnel, scientists rather than soldiers. "You will demonstrate these alleged biological weapons," the commander demanded. "If your claims prove false, your death will serve as an example of human deception. If true, you will be taken for interrogation regarding your species' military capabilities." Nodded as if he had expected this demand. "I'll need access to my research equipment to activate their combat protocols safely. The biological triggers are extremely delicate. One mistake could cause a cascading genetic failure that would destroy years of research." It was a desperate gambit, but was counting on greed overriding their caution. If they believed the cubs represented advanced biological warfare technology, they would want to capture rather than destroy them. And if could convince them he was the only one who understood how to safely handle the supposed weapons, he might buy enough time for a miracle. The commander considered for a long moment, then gestured to one of his subordinates. "Grant him limited access to his equipment. If he attempts any deception, kill him slowly." Was escorted to his scattered research gear under heavy guard. His hands trembled slightly as he activated various pieces of equipment, making sure to create the kind of complex, mysterious procedures that would convince that they were witnessing advanced science rather than desperate improvisation. As he worked, quietly spoke to the cubs in their own language, explaining what he needed them to do. Their intelligence served him well. They grasped the situation quickly and began performing the natural behaviors that reframed as weapons activation protocols. When the largest cub instinctively changed his fur coloration to blend with the surrounding rocks, nodded gravely. "Adaptive camouflage is engaging properly. Notice how the subject becomes nearly invisible even to your enhanced sensors." When the smallest cub began the harmonic humming that used to communicate over long distances, adjusted his scanner to amplify the sound. "Battlefield communication array is now active. This frequency can coordinate attacks across hundreds of kilometers." The scientists who had been summoned from the observed with growing interest as continued his charade. They began taking detailed recordings of the cubs' natural behaviors, completely convinced they were witnessing revolutionary military technology in action. "Remarkable," one of the scientists commented to the commander. The biological integration is far more sophisticated than our own cybernetic enhancement programs, if we could reverse engineer this technology. Felt a surge of hope as he realized they were taking the bait completely. But his relief was short-lived as the commander turned back to him with those cold, compound eyes. "Your demonstration has been enlightening," the commander said. "You and your test subjects will be transported to our research vessel for comprehensive study. Our scientists will be very interested in learning everything you know about human biological warfare capabilities." The cubs sensed the change in the situation and pressed closer too. Their earlier trust now mixed with fear as they realized they were being taken away from their home. Gathered them protectively as soldiers moved in to escort them to the... But as they walked across the devastated landscape toward the enemy vessels, caught sight of something that made his heart leap. Far in the distance, barely visible against the darkened horizon, he could see lights moving in the cave systems where the adult had taken shelter. They were still alive, still hidden, and they had been so focused on their supposed military prize that they had called off the search for any remaining indigenous population. Realized that his desperate gamble had accomplished more than just saving 3 cubs, it had saved the entire species. They would spend weeks or months studying his fabricated biological weapons program, while the real remained safely hidden in their deep cave networks. By the time the truth was discovered, the survivors might have found a way to escape off-world or make contact with other human settlements. As the lifted off with and the cubs aboard, he took one last look at 442B through the viewport. Somewhere down there, parents were telling their children stories about the strange human who had protected 3 cubs from the sky hunters. Somewhere down there, a species would survive because one had chosen to become something more than he ever thought possible. The cubs curled up against as the ship entered hyperspace, their trust in him unshaken despite everything that had happened. They didn't understand that they were now prisoners of the most dangerous species in the galaxy, or that their protector had sacrificed his freedom and possibly his life to save their people. But understood, and as he felt their small hearts beating against his chest, he knew he had made the right choice. Sometimes being human meant standing as an immovable wall between innocence and annihilation, no matter the cost. And sometimes, just sometimes, that was enough to change the fate of an entire world. The spears had shrieked from above, but they had not been able to break the will of one man who refused to let the innocent suffer on his watch. In the vast darkness of space, 3 small lives slept peacefully in the arms of the human who had become their shield against the darkness.